5:36 in the morning, May 27, 1941. Somewhere in the North Atlantic Ocean, roughly 400 miles west of the French coast, Lieutenant Commander Stewart Onslow stood on the bridge of HMS Tartar, a Royal Navy destroyer, watching a ship the size of a city block refuse to die. The German battleship Bismarck had already absorbed hundreds of heavy shells, and most of her senior officers were dead. And yet, she was a 50,000-ton machine built to survive exactly this kind of punishment. The Bismarck was still floating and still fighting back with whatever guns she had left. Onslow had 8 torpedoes, and his ship weighed less than 1/10 of Bismarck's tonnage. Yet, the sea around him was full of British ships that had been chasing this single German battleship for 9 straight days across more than 1,700 miles of open ocean. What Onslow and every other Royal Navy commander in that battle were about to prove was something the German Navy had desperately hoped would never happen: that British tactics improvised under pressure were far deadlier than anyone had planned. To understand why Bismarck terrified the British in the first place, you have to understand what she was built to do. When Bismarck launched in February 1939, she was the largest warship Germany had ever put in the water. She carried 8 15-inch guns, a belt of armor more than 12 inches thick, and a top speed of 30 knots. Her mission in May 1941 was straightforward and brutal, and that was to break out into the Atlantic, find British supply convoys, and sink them. Britain was receiving food, fuel, weapons, and troops through those convoy routes. If those lines were cut, Britain starves. Easy peasy. Admiral Günther Lütjens, the German fleet commander aboard Bismarck, had every reason to feel confident when he left the Norwegian coast on the night of May 22nd. His ship had already proved herself in battle. On May 24th, in the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland, Bismarck fired on HMS Hood. HMS Hood was the pride of the Royal Navy, a ship so famous that ordinary British civilians knew her name. Yet, as powerful as this ship was, Bismarck sank her in roughly 8 minutes. More than 1,400 British sailors went into the water, and only 3 came back up. The shock that hit Britain that morning was personal. Hood had been a symbol, and Bismarck had destroyed her. Here is what made Bismarck so difficult to kill. She was fast enough to run from most British battleships, and strong enough to destroy the ones that caught her. The Royal Navy's older battleships, the ones actually escorting convoys across the Atlantic, stood almost no chance against her in a straight fight. Bismarck could outrun them or outgun them, and she knew it. After sinking Hood, Admiral Lütjens set course for the French port of Brest. German air cover would begin as soon as she got within range of the French coast. Once she docked, she would be repaired and sent back out. The whole nightmare would start over. The British had one window to stop her, and that window was closing fast. Admiral John Tovey, commanding the Royal Navy's home fleet from the battleship HMS King George V, was running low on fuel. So was nearly every other British ship in the chase. One by one, vessels had to break off. The battleship HMS Rodney had been pushing her aging engines so hard that her crew genuinely feared a breakdown. The aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal was the only ship in position to do anything before Bismarck reached safety, and the weapon she had to work with was a biplane torpedo bomber that first entered service in 1936. The Fairey Swordfish looked like something out of the previous war. There was an open cockpit, fabric wings, and a top speed of 138 miles per hour, which was slower than many of the German fighters that would have torn it apart in daylight. But on the stormy evening of May 26th, in low cloud and icy rain, Ark Royal launched 15 of them anyway. One torpedo changed everything, though. As the Swordfish dropped out of the clouds and skimmed the waves toward Bismarck, Her anti-aircraft guns opened up with everything she had. The German crew had beaten off an airstrike the day before. They had already survived one torpedo hit from the carrier HMS Victorious with almost no damage. They expected to do it again. This time, pilot John Moffett released his torpedo at close range on the port side. It struck Bismarck's stern and jammed her port rudder hard to one side. The damage looked small on a ship that size, and it was not small. With her rudder locked, Bismarck could no longer steer a straight course. Every attempt to compensate just brought her back around. She was sailing in slow, helpless circles. At 9 o'clock that evening, Admiral Luchen sent a message to German naval headquarters. "Ship unmaneuverable. We shall fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." He was not exaggerating. Bismarck was going nowhere. Through the night, British destroyers, including the Polish destroyer Piorin, pressed in close, firing torpedoes and forcing Bismarck's exhausted crew to stay at battle stations through the dark hours. None of these attacks were fatal. They were not meant to be. In fact, they were designed to grind down the crew, burn ammunition, and deny sleep to men who had been fighting for days. At 8:47 on the morning of May 27th, HMS Rodney opened fire at a range of roughly 12 miles. King George V followed 30 seconds later. Bismarck returned fire, and her shells landed close enough to drench Rodney's decks with spray. For a few minutes, it looked like she might still hurt someone. Then, Rodney's guns found their range. Her 16-inch shells destroyed Bismarck's two forward turrets in quick succession. A direct hit on the bridge killed most of the officers still alive on the ship. Within the hour, every one of Bismarck's main guns had been silenced. The heavy cruiser HMS Dorsetshire closed in and put 3 more torpedoes into her. At 10:36 in the morning, Bismarck capsized and went under. Of her crew of roughly 2,200 men, more than 2,000 were killed or drowned. British ships pulled 110 survivors from the water before a U-boat warning forced them to leave. The sinking of Bismarck ended Germany's strategy of using large battleships to attack Atlantic convoys. The German Navy never attempted it again. The remaining German surface fleet, including Bismarck's sister ship Tirpitz, spent the rest of the war hiding in Norwegian fjords, tied down by the threat of British attack, and never again threatening supply lines the way Bismarck had. Britain kept its sea lanes open and the convoys kept moving. The tactics that stopped Bismarck ranging from the improvised night attacks, the outdated torpedo bombers in a rainstorm, and the destroyers harassing a giant through the dark were not supposed to work. And yet, they did.